Hello everyone and welcome to the first episode of Eulogy, a show where I take an in-depth look at various media within the horror genre. That is everything from movies to video games to really anything else that I might find worthy of discussion, and I'll critique as much of the content as I can. I myself am a horror enthusiast with many projects venturing into the genre, and to demonstrate that I'm not just a hipster contrarian, I will be making this first episode discussing something that I actually enjoy, because it can be a little too easy sometimes to tear apart something that you don't like, as is evidenced by my creepypasta rants. So without further ado, let's begin with John Carpenter's Cigarette Burns. In 2005, a horror anthology known as Masters of Horror appeared on the Showtime network and was a collaborative project by a number of great directors in the genre. Created by director and filmmaker Mick Garris, who is primarily known for his Stephen King film adaptations, such as The Shining. No, not that one. Garris managed to get some pretty renowned names to contribute, everyone from Dario Argento all the way to Takashi Miike. Each director was given an hour time slot to tell their story with some flexible guidelines. Really, they pretty much had free reign to do whatever they wanted, except Takashi Miike. Yeah, he fucked that one up. There were 2 seasons, each containing 13 episodes, and as I mentioned previously, today I want to touch on one of my favorites, episode 8 of season 1, John Carpenter's Cigarette Burns. If you don't know who John Carpenter is, well, there's the door. He's only responsible for such movies as, Halloween, The Thing, In the Mouth of Madness, The Fog, They Live, just to name a few. Remember he was supposed to be dead like a year or 2 ago or whatever? The point is, you don't get a series together called Masters of Horror and not include this man. Besides Cigarette Burns, he would also direct another episode in the second season titled Pro-Life. Both episodes were written by Rebecca Swan and Drew McWeeny. The whole thing is 59 minutes long and is easily accessible via the internet, so if you have any interest in seeing it for yourself, this would be a good time to stop and go do that. As a heads up, there will be massive spoilers from here on out, so this is your last chance to abort, as I'm about to completely explain the entire plot. Okay, massive plot spoilers in 3, 2, 1. Norman Reedus plays Kirby Sweetman, a film expert and the owner of a struggling movie theater with a dark past who is under immense pressure to repay a debt owed to the father of his late wife, a sum of $200,000. With a job on the side of dealing in rare films, Sweetman is hired by the mysterious and clearly sinister Mr. Bellinger, played by Udo Kier, to hunt down an infamous film known as La Fin Absolue du Monde, which supposedly opened to riots and bloodshed during its premiere at the Sitges Film Festival some 30 years prior. Kirby has doubts of the film's existence, so Mr. Bellinger reveals he has a rare prop from the film, a mutilated angel kept in captivity. Kirby takes the job. His only lead is an A.K. Myers, a reclusive critic who had seen the film and reviewed it, but seemingly disappeared afterwards. Kirby pays him a visit and is given more insight into the film and its director, a Hans Bakovic, who supposedly didn't instigate the chaos that ensued accidentally. He expertly crafted it. Turns out, the film drives people insane. Kirby is then sent off to Paris. He arrives in Paris where he listens to the tape and is suddenly met with a nightmarish occurrence, a foreboding of things to come. After some back and forth with his friend who works in a film archive, Kirby is finally given more information. His friend had been in the presence of a screening of the film, working the projector himself. He was only spared the horrors that befell the audience because he lost his nerve and turned away before it started playing. He gives Kirby yet another lead, but warns him not to follow through, as the lead may be dangerous. Our hero arrives in the French countryside to a warehouse filled with mafioso-like figures, all standing around a box containing some rare items pertaining to the film. A creepy bald man, Dalibor, gives some more exposition and reveals some photos from what appears to be the set or still images from the movie itself. He then captures Kirby and tries to use him as part of his snuff film, but Kirby manages to escape and gets yet another lead, Katja Bakovic, the director's wife, who reveals the director killed himself and attempted to kill her. She gives Kirby the film and warns him of its power. Kirby then gives the film to Mr. Bellinger, gets his money, and is called back immediately as the film had taken its toll on the old man. Shit gets real as the effects of madness are prevalent in the mansion, with the butler gouging his own eyes out and Mr. Bellinger feeding his own intestines into the film projector. Fucking wicked. Kirby's father-in-law shows up, because of course he does, and tries to kill Kirby. They both fall victim to the film's effects, with Kirby murdering his father-in-law, then shooting himself. All the while, the blind butler went and freed the chained angel, who goes on and stops the movie and leaves with the film reels, but not before thanking Kirby for bringing the film to him, thus ending the madness.
Thank you for this.
So first we'll briefly discuss the technical aspects of the film and move on to the analysis of the themes and elements of horror a little later on. As far as camera work is concerned, there's a lot of great work put into its many dynamic shots and movements, and they do well to add to the mood that the scenes are typically aiming for, and there are a lot of good seamless transitions. One thing of note, however, is the overall experience has that made-for-TV feel, which is evidenced in my opinion by the distinct camera quality, acting, and special effects, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. It just means that there wasn't $1 billion budget thrown into every area, and that's okay, because the cinematography overall gives the film an edge that definitely works in its favor. For instance, where it lacks in blockbuster quality production, it easily makes up for with its excellent use of lighting, looming darkness and hard-cast shadows, and use of contrasting these elements for both dramatic and thematic purposes. I'll give you an example here. The early scene involving the angel, with the lighting clearly distinguishing the figure with a bluish, otherworldly hue. Another area where the lighting is most effective for me is when it's cast on the faces of the characters, emphasizing much of the emotions conveyed by them, or conversely, shrouding them in mystery. But easily my favorite use of this lighting was the juxtaposition between the movie's primarily dark atmosphere and the meeting of the director's wife, which was brightly lit and white as if to convey the heavenly side of this struggle between good and evil. Which reminds me, this is an overly dark film, both literally and thematically. The majority of scenes take place in low-lit environments, which are almost reminiscent themselves of old movie theaters, or theaters in general, with warm, incandescent lighting and ornate, sometimes dingy structures. The overall darkness is complemented well by the sound design, which is blended into the environment with no out-of-place noises popping up, as in recognizable stock noises or too jarring of sounds, save for the stingers, which there are several of, by the way. As far as the soundtrack goes, atmospheric synthesizers create that good old 80s creepy vibe. Subtle, but more than enough to create a dissonant, uncomfortable feeling when there's tension on screen. During the final struggle with the father-in-law, a synthesized pipe organ can be heard to really emphasize the almost literal Abrahamic interpretation of evil the film is going for. Hey! Hey! The soundtrack was composed by Cody Carpenter, son of the director, and is very much so reminiscent of the 1978 Halloween theme and some of John Carpenter's work in general, whilst still having its own identity. Clearly an homage, but done well enough. I will say, however, that the soundtrack overall is very safe, with the theme in particular not breaking too many rules or treading into unfamiliar territory. But again, that's not really important at the moment. I'll add more thoughts to that a bit later, though. Unfortunately, when it comes to characters, they specifically seem to only serve to move the plot, rather than really contribute much to it. It's established that Norman Reedus had his tragic past and troubles, but the film doesn't really give us enough time to be invested in it. We don't get enough time to know anyone at all, really, so I found myself being more interested in the story's direction in terms of the infamous film, rather than any character's redemption or the like. The acting is well enough, with some mostly believable dialogue, albeit a bit overly dramatic at times. There are some moments of excellent delivery and what feel like actual emotion.
Stuff isn't powerful. It doesn't reveal some hidden truth. It's just fucking murder.
Norman Reedus does a great job at conveying what goes from interest and intrigue to confusion and frustration, all the way to downright homicidal mania.
We'll never let her go. Not until we're both dead.
Bondage Guy was good.
You're not listening to me, my friend.
Tons of exposition occurs through the dialogue, with much of the film honestly being back and forth conversations between the characters, which I assume that being a made-for-TV movie, it kinda needed to be this way, as getting to the point quickly helps retain viewers and whatnot, but yeah, TV viewers are definitely not as committed as film goers when you can just flip the channel, or so I assume this must be the case. I'm not 100% sure. I want to make it clear, however, that these conversation scenes are usually interesting enough that you don't get bored with them. As I mentioned before, there are some gold moments, but not without a few cliches sneaking their way in.
Henry, you disappoint me.
You should not be here.
I thought we were friends, but you know more than you're telling me.
There is gore, and lots of it, and those who can appreciate film violence reminiscent of earlier times will enjoy this in that it's a whole lot of practical effects. That can translate to some as having a fake look to it, but not to the extent that I would call campy. I'm not a huge gore fan to begin with, but this movie won't disappoint if you happen to be one. And to clarify, when I use the term campy, I'm referring to any moments within a work that are overly emphatic or exaggerated to the point of like satire. Like being over the top on purpose. This movie does not do that. I do want to point out what I would consider to be an obvious homage to the film Begotten, though, with the straight razor disemboweling and theological connotation. Creature effects are solid. The angel itself, simply referred to as the willowy being, is interesting enough, shackled, maimed, and with enough distinctive but subtle features to represent its inhumanness, namely its forehead being overly round and its fingers being slightly elongated, not to mention the color of the eyes and skin in general. Finally, the cigarette burns themselves are quick, flashing rings of fire with a stinger accompaniment, oftentimes displaying startling imagery within them. Done well enough, but honestly nothing remarkable in my opinion, but points for not being obnoxious about it. Okay, so now we specifically delve into the themes, concepts, and story details and see how its strengths and weaknesses fare in terms of horror as a genre. Is it good? Is it bad? Well, let's find out. First, we have the cigarette burns and the symbolism behind them.
See, a movie doesn't come all on one big reel. It comes on a few. So someone has to be there to switch the projectors at the exact moment that one reel ends and the next one begins. If you look for it, you can see these little dots come into the upper right-hand corner of the screen.
In the industry, we call them cigarette burns.
That's the cue for a changeover. He flips the projectors, movie keeps right on going, and nobody in the audience has any idea.
Why would anyone want this shit job?
According to Tibetan mysticism, the Ring of Fire is the border of the known universe, terrifying to look at because fire, but can burn ignorance and misunderstanding and purify transcendence. In this instance, they may just represent literal hellfire and or the cyclical nature of the search for this film.
Carriers of the accursed dark side.
This creates an interesting commentary, albeit a simple one, on the nature of spirituality. Fire purifies all. Flames burn away the past and allow for the emergence of something new, the same way these cigarette burns indicate the end, but the beginning of something new simultaneously. But again, in this instance, it's probably just hellfire and the concept of eternal damnation, which has always been used as a strong area of horror, because it means evil exists as an external force in this world, or at least in the world of the film. Speaking of film, another obvious theme present here is film as a weapon and distorting of the truth.
Film is magic, and in the right hands, a weapon.
Or exposing the truth via cinema as an art form. The idea of using film to specifically mislead, deceive, and blatantly lie to the general public is no new concept. Many a time has the medium been used for attempts at influencing and motivating the populace through propaganda, such as in World War II as just one example. Keep in mind, it wasn't just the Germans, or even later on the communists, who utilized this type of tactic to try to influence people, but the United States as well, with films such as Why We Fight. Movies are good at conveying exactly how the makers wish to portray the world, which can easily influence people depending on what it is and how you show it. This also ties in directly to the concept of subliminal messaging, which is absolutely present in many landmarks in film history and has a spotty track record with advertisement. Subliminal messaging, although technically more appropriately called subconscious influencing, is inserting hidden messages into the film which are not consciously recognized by the viewer, but still may affect them or be perceived in ways they don't expect. Is this a real thing? Yes. And no. But mostly yes. Is there a way to subtly influence your audience to do what you want against their will? No, not really. But is it possible to have several hidden themes and meanings beneath the surface of what is going on screen? Yes, absolutely. One of the most prominent examples that comes to mind is Stanley Kubrick's The Shining and its supposed themes of Native American genocide. But wait, I hear you ask, the movie about a haunted hotel and a guy trying to kill his family? Yup, I'm not making this up. The point here is that depending on who is in control of the camera, that person has control of what you are shown, and should they be attempting to distort the truth, it'll be up to you, the audience, to resist, should you be able to. If a director would want to plant a dangerous idea in your head, it might be possible, just as easy as spreading awareness of real-world issues, which is the flip side to this coin. The movie explored this topic with the, we trust filmmakers to not go too far.
We trust filmmakers. We sit in the dark, daring them to affect us, secure in the knowledge that they won't go too far. He abused that trust we place in filmmakers. He didn't want to hurt his audience. He wanted to destroy them completely.
This is why so many people are fascinated by the existence or potential existence of snuff films. The idea that there could be video footage of murder on camera raises so many questions and a ton of morbid curiosity. Like, is it just a camera in a room, or is it staged like a pornographic film, in that there are actors and sets sometimes and whatnot, maybe even plots? The next point I want to touch on is self-reference in a work. This would not be the first time John Carpenter gets self-referential with the way his movies go. An example would be how the events we witness in the Mouth of Madness are revealed at the end to be a movie being watched by the main character that he didn't realize he was in, but was in all along inside a story he didn't know he was in. Yeah, it gets a little meta. So it was interesting in this movie for two reasons. One, we're obviously shown the cigarette burns, which indicates something creepy is going on, but it also reminds us, the audience, that we're watching the movie. Are these events taking place on screen of the actual movie being pursued? As in, is this all going to be revealed to take place inside the movie La Fin Absolue du Monde? It doesn't take that turn, but I like how these types of questions are raised. On that same note of having questions raised, another great aspect is how the film footage is briefly shown at the end. So if you allowed yourself to be immersed in the story and have been following along, you are now suddenly, without your consent, being shown the infamous film. This creates such an awesome bit of surprise because it can definitely catch you off guard and immediately it grabs your attention. The whole time you're wondering about what actually goes on in the film and the whole thing is building up to it, then suddenly, BAM! Cigarette burn, we're being shown the footage. A wonderfully crafted and definitely unexpected moment. Misdirection and surprise, two strong elements of horror. Now let's talk about the atmosphere and the way this movie gets some things right. There are a ton of ways the film hints at greater horrors without being overtly on the nose about it. Granted, there are a few moments where it contradicts itself and does a few things that I feel are to its detriment, but we'll get to those in a little bit. Namely, I want to focus on greater concepts the film addresses and how they add to the horror of what's going on in and outside the narrative. First, the idea mentioned by the willowy being in the very beginning of how he is bound to the film.
We are a part of the film, bound to the negative like soul to flesh.
But he uses the term we. This is most intriguing because we can easily assume that he might just be using a form of gnosis, that is referring to oneself in the plural form, most notably the majestic plural, such as how a king would speak or something. This would be interesting enough, but again, this raises an even more interesting question, such as, are there more angels that were part of this film? Whom exactly is he referring to? Either way, the implications and the mystery add a whole lot more depth. Which then brings us to being bound to the film. Now this is interesting because not only is it a creepy sounding concept that conjures supernatural imagery, but rather this was a real belief by many cultures around the world, and some supposedly still actually have it. I lived in Seattle for 8 years, and you'll always see this particular picture of Chief Seattle, of whom the city was named after, and his eyes are closed because he actually believed the camera would take his soul had they been open. So this is a creepy two-sided coin as the film plays it. On the one side, you have a supernatural effect of the film's evil capturing the essence of those around it, and you've got the real-world equivalent belief, which makes the idea like this hit closer to home, heightening the creepy factor. Probably my favorite part, though, is the review being written by the critic. The film directly touches upon this.
As soon as I finish my new review.
Is that what this is? All of this? Is that one review?
Almost finished now.
I love this so much because it drives the point home that what was witnessed was so incredibly profound or arcane in nature that to try to humanly describe it in words or to even try to articulate what transpired is so vastly complex that it takes, well, as you see, ridiculous lengths of pages. And the best part is, he's not even finished. Again, we're left to wonder, how long has he been working at this? This added so many questions about the film, and I feel like it was later punctuated by Bellinger's claim that it's not a movie, but rather a preview of things to come.
It's a preview. It's the coming attractions of the soul.
This easily ties into the fear of the unknown and forces us to confront the idea that there may be darker forces at work in our world. On the topic of dark forces, I want to point out a pretty notable similarity between La Fin Absolue du Monde and the infamous King in Yellow of Robert W. Chambers lore. For those who don't know, Chambers was an influential writer during the late 1800s, early 1900s, most known for his collection of short stories, The King in Yellow, which is the title of a fictional play that drives anyone who reads it into madness. It's a bit controversial to state that Chambers had a big influence on H.P. Lovecraft, but Chambers successfully pioneered the idea of only passingly referring to the disturbing elements and supernatural horrors that lurked and their effect on the characters and world around them, oftentimes causing madness and such, but, you know, make of that what you will. Which then brings us to the producers of such a film. It forces us to question as to whether or not they're even human. Would it be scarier if they were truly infernal beings, or simply just the hyper-elite with an uncanny level of power? Would it be easier to accept that demons were responsible, or that the evil that lurks in the hearts of men is actually far more sinister? How did they get an angel, which is creepy enough, a celestial being on Earth? What was it even doing here? What are the implications of that in and of itself? Again, I want to stress that these are not gaping plot holes or anything of the like, but rather these are burning questions that I want to know. And in my opinion, walking away from an experience, regardless of the form of media, asking these things is awesome. So yet another effective area is the concept of lost media, as in, this film is supposedly so rare it is said to have been destroyed. Lost media in general has always fueled some creepy and surreal myths around the internet, because just the idea of some things being deemed not fit for release or scrapped for whatever reason, or simply just lost to time, has always created a sense of wonder and mystery to people. A good example that always piqued my interest was the spider pit scene of the 1933 film King Kong. Yeah, you might have heard of it. Anyway, remember the scene in Peter Jackson's remake where they are ambushed by giant insects and it was utterly horrific? Yeah, well, supposedly that scene, or what the new one was based on, existed within the original black and white film. I know, right? It was removed for a number of reasons, the most often cited being it ruined the pace of the film, but some are not so convinced. A lot of people say that the scene was too horrifying for general audiences at the time, so it was scrapped. The point being, the idea of something being rare means mystery, and as such, they can be the subject of many urban myths that may arise as a result. Urban legends and mystery, supposedly disturbing footage, all effective tools of horror. Okay, so this is shaping up to be way longer than I had originally planned, so let's try to wrap it up. No promises though. With all the good I've said about this movie, it does not come without its flaws, and they are numerous. So I've previously touched upon the whole thing being having that made-for-TV feel, and that's not necessarily for everyone. In all honesty, it feels like it could easily have been made in the 90s when it was released in 2005. The quality seems lacking, seems a bit like the budget is showing. This alone can be off-putting to some. Also, the soundtrack, as I mentioned, was good enough, but that the theme was a bit overbearing at times. At some points, the piano was just a little overall too shrill and in your face, and it kept trying really hard to set the mood while just coming off as annoying. Luckily, this wasn't that constant. But man, once that theme comes on, it lets you know it's here. The overall story is very basic and a little too straightforward. While that does not necessarily mean it's bad, it can rob the audience of their opportunity to interpret many of the subtle natures the film explores. If the film says, "this is evil" outright, then it's not on us to sit back and try to talk about what the director or the writers were trying to say. This is not good storytelling, as the age-old show don't tell is obviously not applied. This movie basically bypasses this whole idea and is entirely okay with outright just explaining everything in detail, while leaving little to nothing to the imagination. Now, this isn't to say I didn't enjoy the film, because I clearly made this video attempting to show off why it's good, but this is just bad storytelling any which way you cut it. Another issue I mentioned previously that I can expound a bit more upon was the pacing of the film itself. Way too much was revealed way too quickly. Everything from the blatant exposition telling us the history of the film.
Violence erupted in the theater. When Hans Bakovic, the director, tried to get it out of the country, the government seized it and destroyed it.
To immediately showing us the captive angel. I understand that time constraints, like, that's a thing, but we are absolutely not eased into a mystery. We're physically grabbed by the balls and dragged along with it. Here's what I would have liked to have seen. Norman Reedus shows up to the mansion and gets the job, showing he knows a bit about the film. He gets back to his place and is researching. Newspaper clips and whatnot show us quick but brief descriptions of where and when the film debuted, maybe with highlighted titles like "Government Seizes Film," "Labels Man Domestic Terrorist," or something like that. His research brings him to several witnesses and people who know about the film, but he's met with all the normal dodging and weirdness that occurs. Norman is then convinced that the film doesn't exist after questioning people and their responses being all weird and off. This would bring us to about the middle of the movie, where he then goes to the guy and is like, "It's not real." Rich guy says, "Nuh-uh, bro, watch this." Reveals the angel, or even just the angel's wings being mounted in that picture frame. Damn, crazy shit happens, then blah blah blah, things move on. Look, I'm not a screenwriter, but this is how I would have liked to have seen the pacing. It allows for us to be involved rather than told every little detail. This is overall my biggest disappointment with the movie. It's such a great concept, but not up to where it could have been, in my opinion. The problem here is that there's no big reveal per se. It starts off saying, yeah, the film is bad, and as we move forward, the only thing that actually happens is bad stuff, and the reveal that yeah, the film is bad. I mean, we knew that. We saw the mutilated angel.
You want to know if the stories about the film are true?
Are they?
Yes.
This is the big problem I had with the Nightmare on Elm Street remake. If you guys saw that, it was like, this Freddy guy is killing us. He's bad, but what if he was framed and was not bad? Oh wait, no, the twist is that he's bad. Oh, the movie just kind of does that same thing for me, and it's not good.
Why are you screaming? I haven't even caught you yet.
But again, I understand time constraints and you gotta keep the audience invested, but still. Having said that, I'm not sure if I would raise an eyebrow at John Carpenter or the actual writers. I mean, on the one hand, not everything a good director does is gold. I mean, The Lost World was still Spielberg and Alien 3 was David Fincher, so you know. I'm more inclined to look at the writers. They had a great idea which, had it been slightly rearranged, could have been amazing. A glaring issue to me, and a fine example though, was with Bakovic's character, for example. I wasn't sure if it was intentionally meant to be contradictory, but the whole time it's played up that he is this evil guy who wants to harm the audience, according to the critic, but on the other hand, his wife says, oh, everybody said bad things about him, so was he actually bad?
Hans Bakovic was a terrorist. La fin absolue du monde was no accident. He told me so.
Was it all just lies and slander about him? Was he under the film's influence or something? Like, how did he strike up a deal with whoever, got this film made for him? I mean, I get it's going down the whole deal with the devil route, but come on, it's just a little too basic. That could have been done much more interestingly. I mean, he even succumbs to the film later on by killing himself and all that, and I don't know. It all just seemed a bit incongruent to me. Okay, so let me end this by saying I really love this movie, and I would recommend you check it out for yourself if you haven't already and don't mind that I've completely spoiled it for you. Because this is a fine example to me of how sometimes simple can be just as effective as unique. Not every film or story has to be 100% original or even groundbreaking in what it covers. Sometimes a simple, pretty basic story told well can be really effective for me, and sometimes the simpler, the better.